Honoria Marlcombe, Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe, stood in the January snow of Nethercott with her hand held out. She was asking for nothing more than a chair by a fire, and the footman of the woman meant to marry her son shut the door on her fingers. She did not cry out. She drew her hand back into the wet grey wool of her shawl, and she looked at the split seam in her glove where the leather had torn across the knuckle. Then she looked up at the great lit house. She did not weep. She counted 3 doors she had meant to try. 1, now, had failed her. 2 were left. From the warm hall behind that door came a voice. It was a young voice, bright and certain, the voice of a woman who had never once in her life been cold against her will. "Do not let that filth near my gown," Lady Cordelia said. "I have 40 guests arriving. 40 candles were being lit inside, 40 guests were coming up the drive in their carriages, and one freezing widow stood on the step in the dark, turned away like something the snow had blown against the door. None of them knew what she wore. Under the mud-grey shawl was a lining no beggar could own, and the woman they turned into the cold that night held, in her keeping, the deed to which of them would ever be warm again. But the crest stayed hidden. The lining stayed turned inward. That is the whole of the story, and we are not there yet. If you have ever wondered who would stay if you had nothing, who would open the door, and who would shut it, then this story is for you. Before I go on, do one small thing for me. Subscribe, so the door stays open for the next of these. And tell me in the comments the town you are watching from tonight. I want to see how far this old story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning and tell it slow. It was the winter of 1868 in the county of Denshire, in the north of England, where the frost came early and stayed late. Thornwyke Hall stood at the head of a long valley, grey stone against grey sky, and it was one of the most beautiful houses in that whole country. It was also dying. You could not see it dying, not from the road. The chimneys still smoked, the windows still shone, but a house is like a person. It can look well on the outside and be bleeding on the inside, and no one the wiser until the day it falls. The old Duke of Marlcombe had died 4 winters before. He had been a careless man with money, generous where he ought to have been prudent, and blind where he ought to have looked hard. After him, the tenant rents had gone to ruin. The farms that fed the estate were let by men who did not pay, and were not made to pay, and slowly the great house lived on money it did not have. The land was rich, the management had been rotten, and rot, given 4 winters, does its work. The widow of that careless man was Honoria Marlcombe. She was near 60 now, straight-backed and quiet, with pale eyes that missed nothing and said little. She had loved her husband and not been blind to him, which is a hard way to love a man. When he died, she had done a thing that no one in her family understood, and that she had told no one. She had let them all believe she was ruined. There was one fine thing left in the world that belonged to her alone. Not to the estate, not to the creditors, to her. It was her jointure, the settlement made on her at her marriage, £11,000, held in trust, hers to keep or spend as she chose. £11,000. In that year, in that valley, it was a fortune that could buy the whole village twice over and have change left for the church roof. And she had hidden it. Not in a vault, not in a strong-box. She had hidden it in a rumour. She had let it be whispered through every drawing-room in the county that the Dowager Duchess had squandered the family into the dirt, that she was a foolish old woman who had run the great name aground. She let them pity her. She let them look down. Because a widow with a fortune draws fortune hunters the way a lamp draws moths, and she did not want her son married for money. She wanted him married for something that would last longer than money, so she made herself poor in the eyes of the world, and she waited. The only fine thing she still owned, she wore turned inside out. It was a plain grey shawl, mud-coloured, the sort a farmer's wife might wear to market. Its underside, no one ever saw. She wrapped it round her shoulders every morning with the plain wool facing out, and she thought nothing of it, and neither did anyone else. That is worth remembering, a plain grey shawl whose underside no one ever saw. Her son was Edmund, the young duke now, 24 and handsome and afraid. He did not show the fear. Young men rarely do. He showed instead a kind of hurry, a bright, brittle hurry, as though if he only moved fast enough the trouble would not catch him. And there was trouble, real trouble, closing on the house like the short winter dark. It came in the form of a letter, and the letter came from a bank. Cordelia and Finch was a private banking house in the city, old and cold and entirely within its rights. It held the mortgage on Thornwyke Hall. £8,400 was owed against the estate, and the debt had run past its term, and Mr. Cordelia himself had written to say, in the flat, courteous language of men who are about to take your home, that the sum must be redeemed within 90 days. 90 days. Or the bank would foreclose, and Thornwyke, the beautiful bleeding house at the head of the valley, would pass out of Marlcombe hands forever. Edmund read the letter twice and set it down and looked at the fire. There was one quick cure for a debt like that, and every young man in his position knew it, because it was the cure the whole world pushed on him. Marry money. Find a girl with a great dowry, and marry her before the deadline, and pay the bank with her father's gold. It was not a shameful thing in that world. It was simply how great houses were kept standing, and Edmund, God help him, meant to do exactly that. There were 3 young women in play that season, 3 possible brides, and Edmund weighed them the way a man weighs coins. The first was Lady Cordelia Vane, an earl's daughter, and the richest of the 3 by a wide mile. Her dowry alone would pay the bank and leave a cushion. She was beautiful in the cold, clean way of a frozen morning, and she knew it, and she had never in her life been made to consider a person poorer than herself as fully real. Edmund liked her best. Of course he did. The dowry was largest, and the manor was grandest, and a frightened young man mistakes coldness for strength. The second was Lady Sybil Ashford, a baron's daughter, sharp and fashionable and quick with her tongue. Her fortune was smaller than Cordelia's, but her wit was larger, and she wanted one thing above all the world, which was to stand higher than Cordelia. She thought her cleverness was kindness's equal. It is not. But she had never been shown the difference. And the third was hardly a bride at all, in the counting of coins. She had no dowry. She had no title. Her name was Susanna Clay, and she was a seamstress in the town of Nethercott down the valley, and she was 3 weeks behind on the rent of a garret over a draper's shop. She came into the reckoning only because she was skilled and honest, and had mended gowns for both the other 2, and because someone at some dinner had said her name aloud as a jest. A seamstress, for a duke. They had laughed. Edmund had laughed too a little, because he was afraid, and afraid men laugh where they should listen. His mother did not laugh. His mother had been sitting quiet in the corner of that room, in her plain grey shawl, being pitied. And she had watched her son weigh 3 women like coins, and she had thought a long, cold thought that she told to no one. A dowry cannot steward an estate. She knew that better than anyone alive, because she had married into a house full of dowries and watched dowries run it into the ground. Money does not manage. Money is managed, well or badly, by the character of the hand that holds it. Her husband had held a fortune and let it slip through his fingers because he was careless and kind and weak. What Thornwyke needed was not another fortune to slip. What it needed was a hand that would hold, and you cannot see a hand's strength in a ledger. You cannot see it across a ballroom. You can only see it in the dark, when the person thinks no one important is watching, when there is nothing at all to be gained by being good. So the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe made a plan that no duchess ought ever to make. She decided she would go herself, on foot, in the worst of the winter, to the door of each of these 3 young women. She would go Not as a duchess. She would go as a beggar, a freezing widow with nothing, asking only for a night out of the cold. And she would let each of them show her, in the dark, with nothing to gain, exactly who they were. She told her son none of it. She told her maid she was going to visit a sick cousin, which was a lie, and she went out into the snow in her mud-grey shawl, with the fine lining turned inward, and she began. You know already how the first door went, but let me tell it to you as it happened, slow, because the manner of a thing is the whole of it. She came to Lady Cordelia's house at dusk, which was the house you saw at the very start, lit for 40 guests. She did not go to the great front door. She went as a poor woman would go, to the side, near the kitchens, where the warmth leaks out and the desperate gather. She knocked, and a footman came, a young man in good livery, and he looked at the grey shape of her against the snow, and his face closed like a book. She asked him, in a plain, steady voice, if she might sit an hour by the kitchen fire. That was all. Not food, not money. An hour by a fire she would not even see the front of. It was the smallest thing a house could give, and never miss. The footman went to ask, because there was going to be a great party, and he did not want to make a wrong choice on such a night. And that is how she came to hear Lady Cordelia's voice from within, bright and untroubled, saying, "Do not let that filth near my gown. I have 40 guests arriving. Put her out." The footman came back. He was not, I think, a cruel man by nature, but he did as he was told, because that is the whole of what such men are paid to do, and the doing of small cruelties on order is how large cruelties get done in this world. He told her to move along, and when she did not move fast enough, because her feet were half frozen and old feet are slow, he put his hand to the door and swung it, and it caught her hand where it rested on the frame, and shut on her fingers. She drew her hand back, she looked at the torn glove, she did not weep, and she did not curse, and she did not tell him who she was, though one word would have brought the whole house to its knees. She simply counted. 1 door. Failed, and then the worst of it, which happened not at the side door but at the front, and in full view. For the dowager, turned away, had to walk back down the drive, and the drive was where the carriages of the 40 guests were now arriving, one after another, lamps swinging, horses steaming in the cold. And a beggar woman walking against the tide of arriving gentry is an offence to the eye of a house like that. Word must have gone up. Or perhaps the footman only wished to be certain she was gone. But as she reached the front steps, in the light of all those carriage lamps, a second footman came down and took her by the shoulder, and, to be rid of her before the fine people saw, he pushed her. She went down. An old woman on frosted stone steps, with carriages arriving and their doors opening and faces turning to look. She went down hard, and her hands came out to catch herself, and the grey shawl slid on her shoulders but did not fall open. And from a lit window above, where the lady of the house stood looking out at her arriving world, came the sound of Lady Cordelia laughing. A light laugh. A careless laugh. The laugh of a woman to whom the fall of a beggar was a small comedy on a party night. The dowager got to her feet. It took her a moment. No one helped her. The guests looked away, as guests do, because the discomfort of a stranger is easier not to see. She stood, and she straightened the shawl, and she walked away down the drive into the dark with her back very straight. She did not answer the laugh, she did not look up at the window. She only marked it in the cold, clean ledger she kept behind her pale eyes. 1 door. Failed, and failed loudly, before witnesses, which is the surest kind of failing, because a cruelty done in front of others is a cruelty a person is proud of. She walked most of that night, and slept in a barn she paid a farmer a penny to lie down in, and in the morning she went on to the second door. Lady Sybil Ashford's people kept a lodge at the edge of a wood, and Lady Sybil was there that week with a small party of her own, clever young people who came to be amused by her. And the dowager came to that door too, grey and shivering and asking the same small thing. a place out of the cold, a corner, an hour. Now Lady Sybil was cleverer than Lady Cordelia, and she was cruel in a cleverer way, which is worse, because it is cruelty that wants an audience and calls itself wit. She came out herself. That was the difference. Cordelia had not troubled to look at the beggar. Sybil came out to look, because a beggar at the door was material, was something she could make sport of for her clever friends. She stood in the doorway with the warm light behind her and her guests peering out over her shoulder, and she looked the old woman up and down. "You've come to the wrong house," she said. "We keep no poor here. We find them lower the tone." Her friends laughed. She was pleased. She went on. She mimicked the old woman's northern speech, the flat vowels of the valley, and did it well, and her friends laughed harder, and she was warmed by their laughing the way honest people are warmed by a fire. Then she took a coin from her purse, a single small coin, and she did not hand it over. She tossed it into the snow at the dowager's feet. "There," she said, "that is to go and be poor somewhere else. Buy yourself a mile between us." The dowager looked at the coin in the snow. She did not stoop for it. Understand what a strange and difficult thing that was. She was, to all the world's eyes, a starving widow, and here was money in the snow, and she did not stoop. But she was not, in truth, starving, and she would not take a coin thrown as a jest to a woman's own friends, because the coin was not charity. The coin was theatre. It was cruelty wearing charity's coat, and she would not put her hand in the snow to help a cruel girl feel generous. So she left it lying, and she turned to go. And Lady Sybil, who could not bear to be left without the last word, called to her man to let the dogs out of the lodge kennels, only to hurry the old thing along, only for the fun of it, and the dogs came barking and snapping at the beggar's heels and drove her back into the dark of the wood, while the clever young people laughed in the warm doorway, and Lady Sybil turned to them well satisfied with her performance. The dowager walked into the wood with the dogs at her back and her heart, I will tell you, very cold indeed. 2 doors. Both failed. And she was beginning, in the deep place where even the strongest of us keep our fear, to wonder if there was a third answer to be had anywhere in the whole cruel world. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps warmth was gone from the young altogether. Perhaps her son was fated for a frozen house no matter what she did, and she had walked out into the snow for nothing but her own stubbornness. But there was one thing she had heard, as she left, that she folded away and did not yet let herself trust. One of Sybil's guests, a quieter young man at the back of the crowd, had watched the old woman refuse to stoop for the coin and turn away with her back straight, and he had murmured, not meaning to be heard, "She carries herself like a lady." Just that. She carries herself like a lady. The dowager heard it and said nothing and walked on. But she kept it. Somewhere, someone had seen. That is often how the truth begins its travelling. One quiet person, at the back of the room, who sees. 2 doors then, both shut, and 1 door left. Down in the town of Nethercott, up a narrow stair, over a draper's shop, behind a small window where a single candle still burned late into the freezing night. Susanna Clay was 3 weeks behind on her rent. I want you to hold that fact the way you would hold a cold thing, and feel the weight of it before I tell you what she did, because everything that comes after turns on it. She was not a poor woman being kind out of comfort. She was a poor woman being kind out of poverty, which is the only kindness that ever truly proves anything. Her garret was 1 room under the slates. In summer it baked, and in winter it froze, and this was the deep of winter. She had a bed, narrow, she had a chair. She had a table, and on the table a single candle, and by the candle she was working, because she was always working. She mended and made gowns for the very butantes who lived in the great houses up the valley, for Lady Cordelia. For Lady Sybil she had sewn for both of them, and had been paid slowly and thanked not at all. That night she was finishing a hem for a lady who would wear it once and forget it, and she was finishing it because if she finished it she would be paid, and if she were paid she might keep the room, and if she kept the room she would not be in the snow herself. That was the whole width of her world, a hem, a candle, a room. She was not thinking of dukes. She had no idea in her head that she was any part of any bride's reckoning. She was thinking of the hem. And there came a knock at the street door below, faint, and then the landlord's dog stirring, and then the landlord's step, and voices. And Susanna, who could hear most things through the thin floors of that thin house, heard an old woman's voice asking for shelter, and heard the landlord refuse her, tired and short, because it was late and cold, and he had no charity to spare for strangers at that hour. Susanna set down her needle. Now think, she owed 3 weeks. She had every reason in the world to keep her head down, to mind her hem, to let the old woman be someone else's trouble. A person with nothing has the best excuse in the world to give nothing. That excuse was hers for the taking, and no one would ever have blamed her for taking it. She did not take it. She went down the stair in her stocking feet, and she found the old grey woman on the step, half turned already to go back into the cold, and she said to the landlord, "She can come up to me. She'll be no trouble to you. I'll answer for her." And the landlord shrugged, because it was no cost to him, and went back to his bed. And Susanna Clay brought the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe up the narrow stair into her one cold room, not knowing her from any other beggar the winter had blown to her door. What she did then, she did without a word of fuss, and that is the mark of the real thing. She did not make a performance of her charity the way Sybil had made a performance of her cruelty. She simply set about it. She put the old woman in the chair nearest the little fire, and she built the fire up, though coal was dear, and she counted every lump of it, and she gave the warmth to the stranger and took the cold side of the room for herself. She had bread, 1 loaf, and not a large one, and it was to last her the week. She took it and she cut it in 2 exact halves, and she gave the larger half to the dowager, because the old are always cold and always hungry, and she thought the old woman needed it more. She made a thin tea and warmed it and put it in the stranger's hands. And then, when the old woman's shivering had eased and her eyes had begun to droop, Susanna did the thing that decided everything. She had 1 bed, 1 narrow bed under the slates, and she gave it to the beggar. She put the strange old woman into her own bed under her own blankets, and she herself went back to the table and the candle and the hem, and she sat up through the whole of that freezing night and worked so that the stranger could sleep warm and she could still finish her work and keep her room. She gave away her fire, her bread, and her bed to a woman she had never seen, on a night when she herself was 3 weeks from the street. The dowager lay in that narrow, warm bed and watched her. She did not sleep, though she let her eyes close. She watched, through her lashes in the candlelight, the young seamstress bent over her needle, hour after hour, tired past telling, mending other women's finery so that she might keep her own poor roof. And the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe, who had walked 2 doors and been shut out and pushed down and set upon with dogs, lay warm under the blanket of the poorest of the 3, and felt something turn over in her old cold chest that she had not felt in a long time. It was not gratitude, exactly, it was something more like recognition. Here it is. Here is the hand that holds. But she said nothing. She had made a rule for herself out on the snow, and the rule was this: the tester acts, and then the tester goes silent. She would not tip her hand with warm words in the night. She would let the deed stand alone, unpaid and unpraised, the way a true deed ought to stand. So she lay still and let the girl think her asleep, and she watched. And she waited for the dark to thin toward morning. Somewhere in the deepest cold of the night, the candle guttering, Susanna's fingers found something. She had noticed, being a seamstress, that the old woman's grey shawl, laid now over the foot of the bed, was torn at the hem. It was in her nature to mend a torn thing when it lay to hand, the way it is in some people's nature to straighten a crooked picture. She took the shawl up quietly, so as not to wake the sleeper, and she turned the torn hem to the candle to set a few stitches in it. And her fingers, which knew cloth the way a musician's know strings, felt something wrong. Or not wrong, something hidden. Under the plain mud-grey wool there was another layer, stiff and worked over with heavy embroidery, thread laid thick in a pattern her fingertips could read even in the dark. A long shape. A bird, she thought, a tall bird with a curved neck, standing fine silver thread on a ground that felt, under her fingers, like black. A heron, a silver heron on a field of black, sewn into the lining of a beggar's shawl, turned in so that no eye would ever see it. Susanna Clay looked at it a moment in the candlelight. She did not know the arms of the great houses. She had sewn their gowns, but never studied their crests. She could not have told you that a silver heron on black was the ancient badge of Marlcombe, or that the woman sleeping in her bed was the Dowager Duchess, whose son held Thornwyke Hall at the head of the valley. She only saw a strange fine thing hidden in a poor thing, and something in her, some good instinct, told her it was not hers to ask about. So she asked nothing. She mended the torn hem with 3 neat stitches, and she folded the shawl with the lining turned safely in again, exactly as she had found it, and she laid it back over the foot of the bed. She kept the secret without ever knowing it was a secret to keep. And she went back to her hem, and she sewed on toward the dawn, while the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe lay warm and awake in a seamstress's bed, having found, at the third and last door, on the coldest night of her life, exactly the thing she had walked out into the snow to find. The candle was very low now. Outside the black was thinning, the faintest grey coming up over the frozen roofs of Nethercott. In an hour it would be morning, and the old woman would rise and slip away before the girl could ask her name, and leave behind her, on that plain wooden chair, a single small object wrapped in a scrap of paper that would change the whole shape of both their lives. But she had not left it yet. And Susanna, bent over her needle, tired to the bone, still 3 weeks behind on her rent, still with no notion in the world of who slept behind her, did not yet know that everything she owned and everything she did not own had already been decided in the dark. The candle guttered and went out on its own, and the old woman lay still in the dark and listened. She listened to the girl's needle. In and out, in and out. A small sound, the smallest sound in the world almost, but it did not stop. That was the thing. Through the coldest hour of the night, when the frost came in under the door and lay along the floor like a blade, the needle did not stop. Susanna Clay was 3 weeks behind on her rent. She had given away her fire, her bread, and her bed, and still she sewed, so that come Monday there would be an honest week's work to carry to the draper below, and a few pennies against what she owed. Honoria Marlcombe had lain in soft beds all her life. She had lain under silk in Thornwyke Hall, in a room with a fire that a servant fed all night so that a duchess would never wake cold. And she thought, in the dark, that she had never once, in near 60 years, felt safer than she felt now in this narrow cot that smelled of tallow and thread, listening to a poor girl work. She had walked out into the snow to find one thing. She had found it. Now she knew what she would do. She waited until the grey came up in the window. She waited until the girl's head at last nodded over the cloth, just for a moment, just once, exhausted past bearing. And Honoria rose, quiet as she could, old bones and all. She took up the mended shawl. She looked at the girl a long moment in that first thin light. Then she reached into the hidden lining, past the silver heron the girl's own fingers had traced in the night, and she drew out a single coin. A sovereign. Gold, she wrapped it in the scrap of paper she carried, and she wrote no name on it. She set it in the middle of the plain wooden chair, where the girl could not miss it when she woke. Enough for the rent. Enough for the 3 weeks owed, and more. Enough that the street, which had been 3 weeks off, would not come at all. Then the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe let herself out of the seamstress's door and went down the dark stair and out into the white morning before Susanna Clay ever woke to ask her name. The verdict was sealed. Not a soul in Denshire knew it yet. Now, while the old woman climbed into the mail coach at Nethercott Cross, wrapped in grey, 3 great houses in that county went on about their business, and every one of them was wrong. At Thornwyke Hall, at the head of the frozen valley, young Edmund sat with a letter he could not answer. You know the letter. Cordelia and Finch, £8,400 against the estate, and 90 days to find it, and the days already running. He was 24. He was afraid. And he had made up his mind, as frightened young men do, to fix the whole ruin with one bold stroke. He would marry money. He would marry the richest door in the county. He would marry Lady Cordelia Vane, and her great dowry would pay the bank, and it would all be well. He thought he was saving his house. He was, in truth, about to hand it to the coldest woman who ever shut a door on a widow's fingers. And down at her father's fine house, Lady Cordelia dressed for another evening and thought nothing at all of the beggar she had thrown down her steps. Why should she? It had been 3 days. The old creature was likely dead in a ditch by now, and good riddance, and it had never cost Cordelia a moment's sleep. That was her whole gift, if you could call it one. Cruelty to those beneath her cost her nothing. She had never once imagined that anyone beneath her might, one day, be above her. And Lady Sybil Ashford told the story at every table she sat at that week. How a filthy old widow had come whining to her lodge, and how she, Sybil, so quick, so clever, had flicked a coin into the snow and bid her go be poor somewhere else, and set the dogs on her for sport. The guests laughed. They always laughed. Sybil mistook the laughter for wit. She never noticed that one man among them, a quiet man, did not laugh. He had said, that night, watching the old woman refuse the coin and walk away into the dark with her chin up, that she carried herself like a lady. No one had listened to him. But he had said it. So there they all sat. Edmund rushing at the wrong bride, Cordelia certain she had won, Sybil telling her clever little story, and the whole county gossiping, low and delighted that some ragged vagrant widow had lately been begging at the doors of the great, and been turned away as such creatures always were. They held nothing. The old woman in grey held every card in the county, and it was a draper who turned the first one over. He was a Nethercott man, and he had been at the cross the morning Honoria took the coach. He had seen a grey-shawled beggar hobble across the yard. But he had also seen, when she thought no eye was on her, how she stood straight for a moment before she climbed up, and how the guard touched his hat to her, low, the way a guard touches his hat to quality. And 3 days after, on business up the valley, this same draper saw the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe pass in her mourning carriage. Near 60, a certain set to her jaw, and he stopped dead in the road, because it was the same face. The beggar at the cross and the Duchess in the black carriage were one woman. He was not a man who could keep a thing like that behind his teeth. By nightfall it was in the tap-room. By the next day it was in every kitchen in Nethercott. The old widow who had been begging at the great doors was no widow at all. She was the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe, in disguise, and she had been going door to door to see how the fine folk treated a beggar. Susanna Clay heard it at the draper's counter, with her mending in her arms. She went cold. She stood very still. She thought of the woman she had put in her own bed, the fine hands, the straight back under the rags, the strange fear in her when she said, softly, that she had walked a long way and been turned from 2 doors already. Susanna had thought her only a poor soul come down in the world, and she had been the Duchess of Marlcombe. In that bed, behind that thin door, all night. And then Susanna thought of the shawl. She had it clear, as if it lay before her now. The torn hem she had mended without thinking, the way her fingers found the stiffness under the grey wool, the raised stitching hidden in the lining where no eye would ever see it. A bird, she had felt a bird worked in thread. Long neck, long legs. A wading bird, standing, she had not known it then. She knew it now, because the whole town was saying the name, and the name had arms, and the arms of Marlcombe were a silver heron on a field of black. A silver heron on black, turned inward against a beggar's back, so that the woman wore the greatest house in the county hidden under mud. Susanna's hands began to shake. She had halved her bread with a duchess. She had scolded a duchess gently for sitting too near the fire. She had a duchess's gold on her chair at home, for she had found the wrapped sovereign, and had not known what to make of it, and had told no one, and had not yet dared to spend it. And she had never once asked the woman her name, because something in her had said it was not hers to ask. She went home the long way, so no one would see her face. At Thornwyke, meanwhile, the clock ran out. The foreclosure notice came. Not a warning now. The notice. Cordelia and Finch had reached the end of their patience and the end of the 90 days, and the paper on Edmund's desk said, in the cold, flat words of a bank, that unless the £8,400 was paid, the house and the lands and the rents would pass out of Marlcombe hands forever. Edmund read it twice. His hand was not steady, and in his fear he did the thing his mother had feared he would do. He called for his horse, and he rode out, and he let it be known through the county that at the gathering at Thornwyke that very week he would stand up before them all and offer for the hand of Lady Cordelia Vane, and take her dowry and save his house, and be done. The wrong bride, the wrong door, and the whole estate and every tenant on it about to go with her. His mother let it come. That was the hardest thing she ever did, and no one saw her do it. She could have stopped it with one word, days sooner. She did not. She let the invitations go out. She let Cordelia be sent for, in triumph. She let Sybil come too, to gnash her teeth at losing. She let the banker Cordelia come, with his papers under his arm, and she sent one quiet message of her own, by her own hand, to a garret over a draper's shop in Nethercott, asking Miss Susanna Clay to come to Thornwyke Hall on the night of the gathering, in her Sunday wool, and to say nothing to anyone of why. She wanted them all in one room. She wanted the whole ledger settled where every eye that had watched the wound could watch the healing. And so they gathered. The drawing-room of Thornwyke was lit and warm that night, warmer than it had been in years, for Honoria had ordered every fire built high. 40 candles, near enough, and no beggar left out in the cold beyond the glass this time. Edmund stood pale and rehearsing his little speech. Cordelia sat near the fire in a gown of pale silk, the very gown, though only 2 people in the room yet knew it, that she had once refused to let a filthy widow near. Sybil sat apart, sharp-eyed, ready with something clever to say the moment Cordelia's happiness became unbearable. Cordelia stood by the wall with his mortgage papers, waiting to be paid, indifferent as a stone to which bride paid him. And near the door, out of place, in plain grey Sunday wool, sat a seamstress with her hands folded tight in her lap, understanding none of it, only that she had been summoned and had come. Then the doors opened, and the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe came in. She came in last, and she came in slow, and she came in full mourning, deep black, the black of a great house, the black they had all thought she wore only for a husband, and a fortune long since thrown away. She was near 60, and she walked like a queen. And over her arm, folded, she carried a plain mud-grey shawl. The room rose, as a room must for a duchess. Edmund started forward, glad and confused, for he had not expected his mother to grace the evening at all. She lifted one hand and stilled him where he stood, and then, without a word, she let the shawl fall open across her arm. The lining turned to the light. The grey wool parted, and there it was, faced outward at last, for the whole room to see. A silver heron. On a field of black, the crest of Marlcombe, that had ridden inward against her back through the snow and the shut doors and the tossed coin and the barking dogs, now blazing plain in 40 candles' worth of flame. The room stopped breathing. Honoria let it be still a moment. She was in no hurry. She had earned the moment, and she meant to have it whole. Then she turned, and she looked at Lady Cordelia Vane. Cordelia had gone the colour of tallow. She was staring at the face above the black, and you could see the thing arrive in her, slow and terrible, the way cold water finds a wound. She knew that face. She had seen it from a warm window. She had watched her own footman shut a door on its fingers and shove it down her frosted steps, and she had laughed. The beggar, the filth she had ordered kept from her gown. The Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe. "You know me now," Honoria said. Her voice was quiet, and it carried to every corner. "You did not know me then. That is the whole of the matter, is it not? What we are when we do not know who is watching." Cordelia's mouth moved. Nothing came out of it. "I came to your door," the Duchess said, "on the coldest night of the winter, and I asked you for a chair by your fire. One chair. 1 hour by the flame. And you had your man shut the door on my hand and throw me down your steps into the frost, and you laughed to see an old woman fall. She let that sit. I asked you for a chair by your fire. You gave me the frost. Keep it, keep the frost, and keep the gown you spared, for you shall spare it a long while yet in this house. You will never be its mistress, not for all your father's gold. A dowry cannot warm a hall. I have been cold in yours, and I will not have my tenants cold in it after me." She turned from her. That was all. She simply turned, as one turns from a thing one has finished with, and Cordelia sat frozen in her spared silk, with the colour gone out of her face, and no clever word, and no dowry, and no duke, before all the same eyes that had watched her rise. And Honoria looked next at Lady Sybil Ashford. Sybil had gone very quiet. The wit had drained out of her the moment the heron caught the light. Honoria crossed to her, unhurried, and she reached into the fold of the grey shawl, and she drew something out between 2 fingers, and she held it up so the room could see it. A single small coin. "You will know this," the Duchess said. "You threw it at my feet in the snow, outside your lodge, before your laughing friends. You paid me a coin to go and be poor somewhere else. Do you remember your own wit? I have carried it these 3 days. Here," she set the coin in Sybil's hand and closed the cold fingers over it. "You paid me to be poor elsewhere," Honoria said. "I am elsewhere now, and so are you, from this house, and from every house of mine, from this night on. You have a quick tongue, Lady Sybil. Keep it. You will have a great deal of time, in smaller and smaller rooms, to be witty in." Sybil looked down at the coin in her palm, her own coin given back, and she had, for once in her life, nothing at all to say. Then the Duchess turned to the banker. Mr. Cordelia straightened against the wall. He had watched all this with the flat patience of a man who is owed money and does not much care about the theatre around it. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "the matter of the estate remains. £8,400. The redemption, forgive me, but a crest and a scolding do not answer a mortgage." "No," Honoria agreed. "They do not. Money answers a mortgage. So let us speak of money, Mr. Cordelia, since You are the only honest cold thing in this room." She looked then at her son, at Edmund, white and lost, who had spent his fear rushing at the wrong door to save a house he thought his mother had ruined. "They have all believed," she said to the room, but truly to him, "that I squandered this family into the ground, that the old Duke died, and his foolish widow ran the fortune through her fingers and left her son with nothing but debt and a great cold house. I let them believe it. I let you believe it, Edmund, and that was the cruelest thing I have done, and I did it to keep you safe. Because a young duke known to be poor is hunted only by women who want a title, and a young duke thought to be secretly rich would have been hunted by every fortune hunter in England and married for his money before he was old enough to know a good heart from a gilded one." She turned back to Cordelia. "I never squandered anything," she said. "When my husband died, my own settlement came to me. My jointure. £11,000 settled on me, mine by law, that no creditor of this estate can touch and no bank can call. I have kept it these 4 winters in trust, whole, untouched, while I let the world call me a ruined old fool. I kept it for one thing. I kept it for the day I could put it into the hands of a woman I could trust to steward this house instead of strip it." The room did not breathe. "The £8,400 will be paid, Mr. Cordelia," the Duchess said, "in full, this week. From my own settlement lawfully, the mortgage is redeemed, the rents will be set right, and Thornwyke will not pass out of Marlcombe hands. You may put your papers away." Edmund made a sound. Relief and grief and shame all at once. His house was saved. It had never needed a cold bride's dowry. It had never needed him to be afraid. "But hear me," Honoria said, and now her voice changed and softened, and the whole room leaned toward it without knowing they did. "The money does not go where the dowry would have gone. The money follows the marriage I bless, and I bless only one door in all this county. I bless the only door that opened." And she crossed the whole length of that bright, warm room, past the Earl's daughter and the Baron's daughter, past the banker and her own son, to the plain wooden chair by the entrance where a seamstress sat in Sunday grey, with her hands knotted in her lap, bewildered near to tears, understanding perhaps a quarter of what she had heard. Honoria Marlcombe stopped before her, and the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe took the seamstress's mending hand in both of hers before them all. "This is Miss Susanna Clay," she said, "of Nethercott. 3 weeks behind on her own rent, on the night I came to her door. She did not know me. She had nothing to gain. She could not imagine that a soul above her might one day owe her anything, and so she did not open her door to buy a favour, for there was no favour on earth she thought she could ever be paid. Her old voice did not shake, but it came very near. She gave me her fire. She halved her 1 loaf, and gave me the larger half. She put me, a stranger, in her own bed, and she sat up the whole freezing night at her needle, so that she might not lose the roof over both our heads. She mended my shawl with her own hands. She felt the crest hidden in the lining under her fingers, and she was too good to pry, and she folded it back and kept a secret she did not even know she kept. She lifted Susanna's hand a little, gently, for the room to see the needle callus on it. "When I had nothing," Honoria said, "and could give her nothing, and was only a burden come out of the snow, she was warm to me. That is the only dowry that has ever saved a house. Not gold. Warmth given to a stranger who has nothing, and I have £11,000 that have been waiting 4 winters for exactly this hand." Susanna Clay looked up at her, and her face was wet, and she did not understand rank or jointures or crests or any of it. She looked at the old woman she had put to bed, and she asked the only thing in her heart to ask. "Did you sleep well?" she said. "That night. I worried the cot was too hard for you. Did you sleep well?" And the Dowager Duchess of Marlcombe, who had brought 2 proud houses low in that room without her voice once rising, put her hand to her mouth and wept. "Better," she said, "than I have slept in 20 years. They were married in the spring. Not for the money, though the house was saved by it. Edmund came to know her slowly, the seamstress who had been kind to his mother in the dark, and he found in Susanna Clay a steadiness that no ballroom had ever shown him, and a plain good sense that was worth more to a bleeding estate than all the dowries in Denshire. He had wanted a brilliant match to silence the creditors. He got instead a wife who had known what it was to be 3 weeks from the street, and who therefore knew, better than any earl's daughter, exactly what a warm house was worth, and exactly what it cost a poor tenant to keep one. Thornwyke came back to life. The rents were set right, gently, by a hand that had been poor and did not forget it. The tenants doffed their caps in a thawed lane that spring, and meant it for the first time in a long time. The valley greened. The house that had been beautiful and bleeding stopped bleeding, and only stayed beautiful. And Susanna, the young Duchess of Marlcombe, sat many an afternoon at a window with the great estate ledgers open before her, learning them slowly, patiently, with the same steady care she had once given a hem by one candle. She was not too proud to learn. She was not too proud for anything. That was the whole of her, and it was enough to save a house. Above her chair, framed, hung a plain grey shawl. The old one. The mud-grey one that had gone door to door through the snow. Only now it hung with the lining turned outward, the way it had never been allowed to hang before. The silver heron on the field of black, facing the room at last, in the open, in the light. The crest of Marlcombe, that had once ridden hidden against a beggar's cold back, now warm on the wall of a warm house, where everyone could see it. As for the others, Lady Cordelia Vane married in the end a colder house than Thornwyke, and got the frost she had spared no one. And Lady Sybil Ashford is witty still, they say, in smaller and smaller rooms to fewer and fewer people, and the coin she threw in the snow she is said to have kept, though no one knows quite why. And the old Duchess. Honoria, she lived to see it all come warm again, and she would sit by Susanna at that window, in the spring light, 2 women who had shared a loaf in the dark before either knew the other's name, and she would say, in her confiding way, that she had learned one thing in near 60 years worth more than £11,000. That you never know who is at your door. That warmth given to a stranger who has nothing to give you back is the only true wealth there is, and the only dowry that ever saved a house, and the only thing, in the end, that any of us are ever really tested on. So if a door once opened for you when you had nothing, if someone was warm to you when there was nothing in it for them at all, think of them tonight, and comment the town you're watching from. I would like to know how far this old story has travelled, and how many warm doors are still out there, in the cold, waiting to be knocked on.